When historians sift through the records of Surat, Gujarat, the year 2014 stands out for a deeply localized crisis. Within a tightly confined residential society, a sudden wave of mental breakdowns, abandoned homes, and unexplained deaths tore through the population. To understand what happened, we have to isolate the geography of the infection. This schematic maps out the active quarantine zone. It's a closed loop of interconnected lanes, anchored by the homes of a local named Vishnu and a Marathi family directly across the street. The first signs of trouble appeared precisely within these boundaries. Because of the intense summer heat, young men and women in the neighborhood regularly slept on their open terraces. But within a span of a few weeks, residents across multiple unconnected houses reported the exact same physical trauma. At night, they were waking to the sensation of an invisible weight crushing their chests and hands tightening around their throats. When Vishnu's brother, the Marathi sisters next door, and families from 3 separate houses all report identical physical trauma, individual psychology ceases to be a sufficient explanation. This is a spatial epidemic, contained entirely within the physical boundary of these specific streets. By late October, the threat descended from the rooftops and breached the locked doors of the ground floors. Late one night, Vishnu's sister walked out of her bathroom and found a man clinging to the top corner of the wall like a spider, staring directly down at her. She was completely awake. She was walking on her own 2 feet. The community could no longer write the anomaly off as a shared nightmare or sleep paralysis. The entities were physically occupying the living spaces. Desperate for a solution, the residents relied on standard religious protocol. They brought in local priests to perform intensive house cleansing rituals and havans, sacred fire ceremonies, hoping to purge the space. The smoke cleared, the priests left, and the entities immediately returned. Standard religious frameworks failed completely. The community was dealing with a supernatural pathogen that ignored all conventional boundaries and actively mutated its approach to target residents inside their own homes. The psychological harassment soon escalated to direct, waking encounters with the youngest residents. A 5-year-old boy named Golu wandered into the street to use the bathroom. A voice called out to him, mimicking his mother. When he turned around, he was face to face with a woman in a red bridal sari. She had no eyes. Golu survived the physical encounter, but his mind broke. The boy's mental collapse was total and permanent. Despite years of medical intervention, he remains trapped in that moment, constantly repeating his desire to leave with the eyeless woman. Then, the timeline crossed over into lethal territory. At 2:30 a.m., a young woman named Saroj was walking down the neighborhood's main merging lane. Halfway down the path, she realized she wasn't alone. The woman in the red sari was walking in lockstep right beside her. Saroj made it to her doorstep before collapsing. When she woke up in the hospital days later, her personality had been completely erased. She spoke in a different voice, rejected her family, and demanded to return to the woman in the sari. Shortly after, Saroj died under completely unexplained circumstances. Saroj's death shattered the remaining illusion of safety. The entity had demonstrated the capacity for lethal force, turning the community's confusion into a desperate fight for survival. Realizing local rituals were useless, the community escalated their response. They reached out to an entirely different class of practitioners, Radhikant and his guru, men who specialized in high-level spiritual exorcisms outside of city limits. But the entity struck first. Before the exorcists even reached Surat, they booked a hotel room 40 kilometers away. At 3 in the morning, a woman knocked on their door, claiming Ravikant had sent her. No one else knew where they were staying. When the practitioners refused to open the door, the illusion dropped. The voice shifted from a calm 30-year-old woman into a horrifying, guttural scream. Looking through the gap beneath the window, the men saw that the creature standing in the hallway had physically twisted, reversed legs. The investigation ended right there. Before either practitioner could set foot inside the residential society to perform their rites, both men were killed in sudden, bizarre traffic accidents on the highway. The force occupying the neighborhood acts as a lethal immune system, violently terminating anyone who attempts a spiritual cure. To understand why this specific plot of land is so aggressive, we have to stop looking at ghosts and start digging into the dirt. Following the trail of property records, investigators located the oldest living geographical source, an elderly priest who had lived on that exact plot of land for 30 years, long before the modern concrete foundations were ever poured. He provided the missing macro-historical context. In 2002, extreme violent riots swept through the city of Surat, turning localized neighborhoods into active war zones. But the priest narrowed the focus to a specific micro-event that took place on the exact coordinates where Vishnu society stands today. Amidst the chaos of the riots, a mob broke into a home belonging to a newlywed couple from Uttar Pradesh. The home invasion was remarkably brutal. The attackers murdered the young husband on the spot, then cornered his new bride, brutalized her, and burned her alive inside the house. On the day of her murder, the young bride was dressed in her traditional red bridal sari. She was burned alive within the home, her body left broken in the same spot where the entity with twisted legs now stalks the residence. The exorcists didn't fail against a single demon. They were crushed by the collective, unresolved trauma of a historical massacre trapped in the soil. The land itself had absorbed the violence of 2002, and it was violently rejecting anyone trying to quietly sweep it away. Today, the neighborhood remains a cursed, partially abandoned zone. Those who had the financial means to flee, like Vishnu's family, immediately packed up and left. The people still living there are the poorest residents, trapped on top of a mass grave they cannot afford to escape. Extreme human violence permanently rewrites the reality of a location. You cannot simply pave over a massacre with new concrete and expect the ground to stay quiet. The echoes remain, and they will violently demand to be remembered.